You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on Spreaker.com and on YouTube. Journey for Truth is always on demand and with many new episodes. Thank you for joining me. I am Tammy Urbanic. You can take a moment and visit my website at empowermentthroughhealing.org. There you can read all about life energy flow Tai Yi, the different treatments that I offer, what it's about, the history, and much more information about my work. My guest this week is Laura Johnston Kohl. Laura is one of the survivors of the Jonestown massacre, the very unfortunate event that happened in 1978. She was part of the People's Temple, and she's going to share with us her experience in the People's Temple and that whole tragic event. Laura, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad you asked me to join you.
Now, first, how did you become involved in the People's Temple?
I grew up in the 1960s, and so I graduated from high school and went to college in the mid-60s. And so that one decade of all the United States history during my life and really for decades before, we never had a decade where it seemed to be perfectly okay to shoot down leaders. And in that one decade, there were at least 5 wonderful people who were shot by kind of this vigilantism that had taken over the country. I mean, we lost John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, all people who had tremendous potential to make our world better, and they were shot down or killed by people who disagreed with them. And so I couldn't really let the decade go without having some kind of reaction to it.
So then what was it about the People's Temple, though, that was attractive in Jim Jones?
So what I did is I started college in 1965, and I was part of the student, SDS and the movement on campus, and I worked against the war in Vietnam and even got tear gassed walking down Fifth Avenue in New York. But I was determined to make a difference in what was going on in the world. I briefly tried spending time with the Black Panthers. So for about 6 or 7 months, I had, I lived with the Black Panthers. I was part of their meetings and things, trying to figure out how to make the world better. And that didn't work for me after 6 or 7 months. Then I tried Woodstock to think if, maybe I should just forget about everything and not be involved. And that really wasn't an answer for me. So about that time, I moved out to California, and I had my first contact with Jim Jones. And so Jim Jones had a multiracial group of people who had all, from every socioeconomic and racial groups, were all part of this enormous, a vision of what things could be. And so I was immediately drawn to it, and I even thought that Jim Jones was kind of a protector. In a way, I thought that he would be able to protect me from some of my own bad decisions.
Well, isn't that how he portrayed himself as well? That he was kind of, I'm not sure if he used the word savior, but he was your protector. He was almost like a father figure.
He was. He seemed to be kind of a father figure even to the children. I mean, all the children wanted to change their last names to Jones. They wanted to be part of the Jones family. So Jim had his own 6 children that he had adopted from every race. And then besides that, people who were part of the temple all gravitated towards him. I mean, they loved that, people say he was charismatic, but really he was caring and inclusive and just kind of an interesting person to be around. So he set himself up as both a protector and somebody who was a good friend to people.
Now, there were reports, or have been reports, that he was on drugs and that he was mentally ill. What was your experience of him?
Well, there is no question at all that in Guyana, by the time he got to Guyana, he was both physically ill, mentally ill, and addicted to drugs. So in Guyana, as his health was declining and his stability was, getting less and less part of his lifestyle, there's no question about it at the end. At the beginning, I think that he was a borderline personality disorder, and there are many people who are borderline personality disorders, but they become functional in life and they surround themselves in a kind of a secure place to live, and so they work through it and they don't, create havoc to people around them. So I think what happened was his personality disorder, I do believe it was a narcissistic personality disorder. As his ego was more and more affirmed and more people kowtowed to him, I believe that his ego really took over control of any of the part of him that would be altruistic or, actually pure. I think that towards the end, he was really consumed by ego gratification and getting what he wanted, and he wanted the power over the people all around him.
Now, did he really believe, you're saying it's kind of towards the end, but what about when he was having all of these people go to Jonestown? And
The interesting thing about Jonestown is we were only there about 2 years. There was a small crew that went down before that, but in the 2 years we were there, I went down in March of 1977, and everything ended in November of 1978. So when I first went down, there were about 40 people in all of Guyana. And so over that really less than 2 years, we built up this place in the interior of Guyana, 24 hours by boat from Georgetown, and most people can't find Guyana on the map and don't know that Georgetown is the capital. And we were 24 hours by boat away from that with no communication. So we were very remote. But in those 2 years, we built this, enormous community where 1,000 people a day were fed 3 meals, and their medical needs were taken care of. So we were not there very long. So in that 2 years, though, Jim really disintegrated. I think that, he had been used to being in San Francisco where the mayor might call him or the police chief or somebody else might call him to, help or to bring some people to a rally or something. And so he was kind of used to being on the most important, the VIP list. And then when we got to Guyana, he really had about 1,000 farm workers because we were stressed working, from sun up to sun down. Mm-hmm. So, I think that his ego was also shattered that he had such a fall from grace.
Well, it was a cult. If we're going to look at the definition of a cult, isn't that in wanting everyone to have the same line of thinking, the very same beliefs, the very same way of living, and there's a lot of control over people's movements. I remember from reading your book that you had a little intimate episode when you went to Georgetown, and they punished you for being intimate with a man, even though you were a full-grown adult. So doesn't that type of organization really take a twisted way of thinking, I guess?
Oh, yeah. First of all, there was a double standard that Jim could have whatever secretary or mistress he wanted, and he would justify it in a way by blaming the other partner. Oh, she had a terrible self-image, and so he had to have sex with her to make her feel better about herself, or she had a terrible tragedy, and so he had to help her overcome it. So he could, kind of write off any promiscuity he had, even though he was married for, years before I even joined the temple. So he continued to have mistresses up until the end. So there was that double standard. And the other thing is, Jim really insisted that all people would have their primary relationship with him. It wasn't always sexual, but right. He would be the confidant. He would be the one who made the decisions. He would be the one you would go to. And you wouldn't, what he really didn't want is having people with pillow talk or having some other relationship that got between him and whoever the person is. So when I had the affair in Georgetown, part of it was, I had a position that I was representing People's Temple in Georgetown, and so, it felt that was inappropriate that I would be involved with somebody, sexually. And so that was one part of it. And the other part is that, he was in control, period. And for somebody to use, their own discretion or make a decision about anything really without checking with him was an anathema in People's Temple. Jim had to make the decisions.
Right.
He was a hands-on manager all the way down to who needed to buy shoes when they were in Georgetown. He made all those decisions. So in a way, it wasn't just sex. It was that somebody made such a big decision without even consulting him or having him involved.
Now, there were also reports of abuse, children being abused, adults being abused. You wrote about some of the methods in your book. I think it was called the PC, and was that called, did that stand for Planning Commission?
Yep. Planning Commission. Uh-huh.
And so when someone would get in trouble, there would be this method of punishment, which I do not remember you going into detail about physical punishment, but there have been some reports of physical punishment. What was your experience with that?
There was a time in People's Temple where the biggest part of punishment was spanking. So, say for instance, if somebody was smoking. In People's Temple, the congregation did not drink, smoke, or use drugs. So, when somebody who was in the temple was a smoker and they were caught smoking, then they would be disciplined by being paddled. So, what would happen was, say I'm smoking and somebody saw me smoking. So I would be brought up in our closed-knit family sessions. Okay, Laura is smoking. So at that point, somebody, maybe my husband or maybe somebody close to me, so, in a way, Jim's always trying to tear down any kind of relationship other than a relationship with him. So somebody close to me would spank me 10 times with a paddle. So that would go on, and then after that happened, there was really no reference back to check in with the person to see how it went. And so looking back and after talking to people who were spanked with a paddle, the part that those of us who were never spanked didn't realize is that's permanent damage.
Right.
So one woman who was spanked, she left the temple the very next day because she was bruised from, the back of her knees up to above her buttocks. She was completely bruised from the paddle. So in a way, to see it happen, you didn't even know the degree of the damage. And there's another person who was, kind of a peripheral part of the temple who left, but his family was in Jonestown and they died, but he was an older stepbrother. He was spanked also with the paddle in the temple, and even today he has a permanent back injury from being spanked with a paddle. So that went on for about 9 months or a year in People's Temple until I guess there was enough feedback to Jim directly, maybe from the doctors in the temple, but then that stopped, but the rest of the congregation never heard that conversation. So I would see somebody spanked, and then I'd never hear anything else about it. The person wouldn't talk about it because probably the person, was told, okay, now keep it to yourself, it's not public information. And so that person was told to shut up about it. And so none of us knew the degree of damage that was done. And so, but that definitely went on, and that went on in front of us. And I think that unless you got spanked, you didn't know that it was such permanent damage.
Well, certainly there is that definite possibility. Weren't there times during your time there that you thought, something's off, something's not right, maybe I need to start questioning this, maybe I need to leave? Did you have those moments?
When I was in Guyana, I was really an enthusiastic follower. And when I saw things that didn't seem right, my way of thinking about it is, we've been here 8 months, 10 months, 14 months. There are a lot of things that need to be worked out that are not, there are a lot of things, but I thought everything was workable. And in fact, I think sometimes, that in People's Temple, there was nobody, the whole span of People's Temple that I was there before, that anybody was ever killed. That we had people who left the temple, we had enemies that Jim would talk about, but there was never anybody who was damaged. So in a way, it just meant that we had things to fix, and we would fix the discipline, we would fix these other things, but everything seemed fixable to me. There was never a point that things were so horrific that I didn't think they could be fixed as we got our community together and we got more like overview and perspective and we weren't working so hard. So I never gave up on the fact that the community would be able to, see that this was not right and would work it out. I was always optimistic that it would work out.
Now, in your book, you also talk a lot about feeling very fulfilled with the physical labor, the different things, the counseling, the manual labor that went on. Do you, when you look back, do you think that perhaps all of that required work was in part necessary to feed everyone, clothe everyone, take care of everyone, but also did it feed as a distraction?
I didn't see it as a distraction. I thought, because I was a philosophy major in college and it was very cerebral and I could see myself, being a college professor or something. And really that was not what I was interested in doing. And so in a way, I am convinced that if you want to make a big change in the world, you have to start with yourself by making a big change and making that commitment. Mm-hmm. So that was my point of view. Now, I have heard, since I wrote the book, one of my fellow survivors told me that Jim told her in 1972, so when I was still, pretty new, he said, keep them tired and keep them poor, nobody will ever leave. Mm. So that's what you're saying. So, see, right. My point of view is I was fulfilled. I was driving a Greyhound bus. I was working at the welfare department. I, was doing all these things that were completely out of the box thinking of what I was going to do as an adult. So I was kind of looking at it that way. And yet, early on in my time in People's Temple, Jim said, keep them poor and keep them tired. And so that's what he was doing.
Right.
So he had a whole other strategy. Mm-hmm. No question about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you find out about the mass suicide? Because you weren't there. You were in Georgetown.
Right. And so what happened was in Jonestown, Congressman Ryan had gone out there with his, a group of the media went out there and some people from concerned relatives, people who had family members in Jonestown, and people who, felt that people were being held against their will. So mm-hmm. Congressman Ryan had a whole group of people, his whole entourage, and about 20 people decided that they wanted to leave. So, when you look at it, we have 1,000 people in Guyana and 20 people wanted to leave. There's like nothing. If 200 people had wanted to leave with Congressman Ryan, it wouldn't have changed what we need to do anyway. Really that 20 people would have such an impact really is absurd. Really, so it just shows how off Jim was anyway. Right. But anyway, so what had happened in Jonestown, and Congressman Ryan took these 20 people, and he took the rest of his entourage to the planes to fly back to Georgetown. Jim sent a truckload of people with guns to the airstrip with instructions to kill Congressman Ryan and anybody else they could kill, and then come back. Mm-hmm. So they did go to the airstrip, and they shot and killed Congressman Ryan. Mm-hmm. They shot Jackie Spear, and a number of other people were wounded at the airstrip. And 3 other people died also at the airstrip. So when the people came, while they were gone, Jim brought everybody into the pavilion in Jonestown and said, we've now killed a congressman, so we are conspirators to kill a U.S. congressman. Life will never be the same. You don't have any money. You have donated your houses to me. You don't have a place to go back. Your family won't have anything to do with you because you're felons now. You're involved with, the conspiracy to kill a U.S. congressman. So you're
continuing to break them down emotionally. Yeah, continuing to break them down emotionally and convince them to take their lives.
So they were, totally exhausted just in preparing for Congressman Ryan's visit. And then on top of that, Jim pulled them in. And then while he is, delivering this message saying that you can't go home again, there's nothing you can do, life will never be the same, then his same secretaries and mistresses went down where all the children were spending, because usually the seniors and other people were inside the pavilion, and then the kids were off to the side. And so the secretaries and mistresses went down the side and started giving the children the poison. So Jim was coercing the adults, and then in a way he just moved it so that there was no debate. Once the children started dying, there was no way that the people who were in the center were going to be able to, go home after that with their children dead.
But how did you find out?
So what happened, it was all arranged ahead of time with a coded message that Jim had somebody call around to both Georgetown, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Redwood Valley to say that everybody in Jonestown was dying and it was time for everybody to commit suicide. So I was in the house in Georgetown, and the woman, Sharon Amos, was on the radio, and she got the message. So I had the only car in the house, so she sent me across town to get the basketball team, because two of Jim's sons and some other young people were in Georgetown to have a competition with a guy in the a basketball competition. Okay. So they sent me across town. I came back with Stephen Jones and Jimmy Jones, who were 18 and 19, and some of the other basketball team and some of the other leadership in the house. And Sharon met with them up in the back bedroom. And she said, Jim has sent this message that we're all to kill ourselves. Everybody in Jonestown is dying. So Stephen Jones was 19, and he said, it's all over. We're not doing it. We are not following this madman's, instruction. So Stephen stopped it, and he said if he could only get out to Jonestown, he'd stop it in Jonestown. But, of course, there was no way to get out. By the time he went to the airport and flew out and everything, there was no way for him to get there in time. But he stopped it everywhere else. So in the house, those people who were in the meeting knew about the instructions from Jonestown, and the other 40 of us in the house didn't know about the conversation at all. So Stephen stopped it. He said, we're not doing it. And then he came downstairs. Nobody mentioned the call or the conversation or anything. And we all went about our business. We stayed busy. So that night we had a talent show put on by the local government. So we were going to that. And so we all just left the house taking care of things. And then Sharon Amos did kill her 3 children and then herself in the house. Which is
just another huge tragedy. Now, after you returned to the United States, you joined another group, a cult, I guess, pronounced Synanon. Is that correct?
Yes.
What happened there?
Well, I came back and I tried for a year to reconnect with the survivors and kind of rebuild, start life over again. Really, it wasn't even rebuilding because there was no building block. Just to start life over again, but it didn't work for me to be with the survivors because we were all so traumatized by it.
Right,
so after about a year, and then, in a way, one of the worst things that we had to deal with was having free time. Because in People's Temple, from the moment you got up, you were booked until you fell into bed at night.
Right.
There was never a time that you were going to be able to relax or, have leisure time or anything. So when I came back to the United States, I was so used to having a wonderful, full life that I didn't know what to do with my time. So I went to work, I went to school at night, and I had my Friday, Saturday, and Sunday clear, and that was the worst time of the week because I just couldn't figure out how to, make my life whole again. So I moved into Synanon because it was a drug rehabilitation facility, a residential drug treatment.
Right.
And I didn't use drugs, but they had 24-hour activities and things going on. So there was always something going on. Somebody who was kicking heroin or somebody who, was in dire straits with drugs or something. Somehow there was always something going on somebody I could hang out with. And so I started hanging out in Synanon first for about, 4 months or so. And after a year, I moved in. So in January of 1980, I moved into Synanon. And it was a residence, but I was able to move in because the leader, Chuck Dieterich, had started it as for alcoholics. And about when I was ready to move in, he fell off the wagon and started drinking again after his wife died of cancer.
Now,
and so it was kind of a headless group.
Right, but there in this group, there was also reports of abuse. Did you see anything going on there that you thought, this doesn't look right, it doesn't sound right, maybe I need to leave?
I think that the things that went on that were really crazy in Synanon were before I moved in, and they weren't really talked about, publicly either. I know that there was a lawyer, and because he decided to come after Synanon for some valid points, but he decided to come after Synanon, two members of Synanon put a rattlesnake in his mailbox.
Wow.
So, Synanon had its own seedy and crazy history, no question about it.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, what are the signs of a cult?
Well, the way I would see it, is, first of all, if you were to alienate yourself from your own family, like even, my son is adopted, and what I always tell him is, you can never be loved enough. So if you have a relationship with your birth parents, with your adoptive parents, with your extended family, with people family that you have this casual adoption with, it doesn't even have to be in papers, but however many people can love you, it makes your life richer. And so I think one of the primary things that cults do immediately is have you alienate yourself or separate yourself from your actual family and take on this brand new family where somebody in control has more decision making about what goes on. So you are isolated from your blood family, and you're part of a different family where someone else is in control. So I think that's a primary thing that happens in most cults.
Yeah, I would agree.
And another thing that happens is, I think, with Jim Jones, there was never a transition plan of who was going to take over at the point that he was too old or infirm to go on. There was never a transition plan.
That makes sense.
For who was going to take over. So if you move into a cult and the cult leader says, I am God, or I am your leader, or I am your father figure, or I'm whatever I am, if there's never somebody who's going to take that person's place when something happens to him, that's a huge red flag. And if we had thought about it with Jim Jones, we'd say, okay, so who's next? Here's Jim. He's looking poorly, some people picked up that, he sounded really crazed and things. So, all these things people noticed, who's going to take over? There was no one there set up to take over for this person because he wanted to be in charge of everything.
Exactly. So if there's no plan, no transition plan, then it sounds like that could be a definite sign of a planned mass suicide. That's
right. Or control. Not all cults end up in suicide, and in a way,
right.
Even when we join People Simple, because there had not been another cult that had suicide as part of their ending or their demise, in a way, it was not one of the things we expected or anticipated or thought about. That wasn't even, you look back and say, okay, so here's a clue. Okay, I didn't pick up on it. Here's a clue. I didn't pick up on it.
Right.
All these clues, but so much of it was that there had never been anybody like Jim Jones who moves people to a remote part of in another country, in another, hemisphere, and then all of a sudden they all died. That had never happened before. So there was no way for us to know that somebody could be that insane that he would kill himself, his whole family, and all of the people that he had really nurtured and taken care of for years. It was just unheard of and unimaginable.
Absolutely. But real quick, so we're running out of time. What advice can you offer to families? So, for example, if a family recognizes that their child, their brother, their sister, whomever, is potentially entering into a cult, what advice might you have for the family to approach or address that family member?
I don't know if any kind of deprogramming would have helped me along. I do know, though, that, your parents have to love you. I mean, they have to always be there. Like, my mother was going to come visit me in Jonestown. She never abandoned me. So whatever is going on, because not all cults end in, the 918 people dying.
Right.
But cults are really dangerous. And when I was in, earlier this year in October, I was in Grand Rapids, and I was at the public library for a presentation and at a university. And after two different presentations in two different locations, girls came up to me and said that they had just left a cult and they were just trying to, put one foot in front of the other to keep going, and they thanked me for being an inspiration. And so you just have to be there for your kids.
Yeah.
You have to be, if they call you, you drop everything and go.
I agree.
You can't alienate somebody. No matter what choice your child makes, you have to stay for that child.
I completely agree. With
so
having
important.
my own daughter who is 22 years old, and I have my little grandson, I cannot possibly imagine walking away, abandoning, or just saying, it's your deal, it's your issue, and never trying to offer assistance. So I completely agree that when you have a child who has a strong family unit, that's definitely going to help. I can see how cults will draw upon people's injuries and their sense of worthlessness, and their sense of, I don't belong anywhere. But now look, here's this cult and I belong here. And people get excited
about that.
And I have a
protector.
That. Yeah, exactly.
And then,
now, where can people find your book?
My book is in Audible and Kindle and print and Amazon.com, or if you want a signed copy, you can look at my website. It's www.jonestownsurvivor.com, and I have a Facebook page for Jonestown Survivor, so I put my schedule up on the Facebook page or on my website. But you can get it always from Amazon.com, and it's in all kinds of print and audio formats.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for being a guest on my show this week.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Also, if people ever have questions, I answer any questions that come around. So if they have questions and they just send it to my website, I'll always answer questions.
Excellent. And I want to thank the listeners for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on Spreaker.com and on YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.